approximately 325 words. You're doing it right now. You don't even notice. That little calculation running in the back of your skull, the one that checks before you speak whether the words are safe, whether they'll land correctly, whether the person across from you will nod or frown or worse, go quiet in that particular way that means you've miscalculated again. You've been running that calculation so long, you think it's just thinking. You think that's what a mind does? Monitor, adjust, perform. It isn't. Perform. That's not thought. That's a cage. A very elegant cage. Beautifully constructed. I'll give whoever built it full credit, but a cage. And the cruelest part, you built it yourself. You just had a lot of help deciding what shape it should take. See, most people, when they talk about approval, they talk about it like it's a flaw, a weakness to correct. Something you manage, the way you manage a bad knee or a tendency to overspend. They frame it as a problem to be solved by becoming slightly more confident, slightly more unbothered, slightly more whatever the word is this week. But that's not what approval seeking is. That's not where it lives. It lives much deeper than confidence. Confidence is just the costume you wear over the wound. The wound itself is the belief carved into you early, before you had language for it, that who you actually are is not quite enough, not quite safe. That the real you, unedited and unperformed, will cost you something. And so you learned to edit. And then you forgot you were editing. And then one day you woke up and couldn't remember what the original draft looked like. That's what this is about. Not confidence. Not self-esteem. Not any of the comfortable words. What it feels like the day you actually stop. Part 2. The pain point pi haka 2. The pain point proxy. Let's go back to where it started, because it didn't start with your boss or your ex or whoever you're currently auditioning yourself for. It started much earlier than that, earlier than you'd like to admit. You were small, and the world around you, the specific particular world of the adults in your vicinity, gave you information. Not advice, not lessons, information. The kind that bypasses language entirely and goes straight into the nervous system. It told you this version of you right here is fine. And this other version, this louder, stranger, needier, more inconvenient version, produces something uncomfortable in the room. And when a room full of people who have power over whether you eat and sleep and feel loved gets uncomfortable, a small creature learns very quickly to smooth the edges. You didn't choose it. You didn't even decide it. You just noticed and adjusted and adjusted and were rewarded. And that was the beginning. Fast forward. Now you're older. The survival mechanism that kept a child safe in a room full of complicated adults has grown with you, but it hasn't been updated. It's still running the same operating system. It still treats every disapproving look like a potential catastrophe. Every social silence like evidence. Every moment of being misunderstood like confirmation of the original thesis. You are not quite enough. Be dia. And you had better fix that before anyone notices. Here's what the internal monologue actually sounds like. Not the cleaned up version you'd tell a therapist. The real one. You share an opinion, and then, immediately, before the other person has even fully processed it, there's a secondary thought that arrives like a chaperone. Was that too much? Did that land wrong? Should I walk it back? Should I soften it? And you start monitoring their face, reading micro-expressions like a satellite dish pointed at someone who didn't ask to be analyzed. And if they look even slightly blank, you start filling in the silence, explaining, qualifying, laughing at yourself before they can laugh at you. Performing a preemptive apology for taking up space. And you've been doing this so long it feels like personality. I know a man, deeply committed man, very earnest in his sense of duty, who once told me the mask he wore was for everyone else's protection, not his. He was very clear on that point. The thought that it might also protect him from the terrifying vulnerability of being actually known had never quite made it into his moral inventory. I found that fascinating. The stories we tell ourselves to make the cage feel noble, the real cost, and this is where I want you to sit for a moment, is not the exhaustion, though the exhaustion is real. It's not even the resentment, though, that accumulates quietly like water damage in a wall you can't see through. The real cost is that you have spent a significant portion of your life curating a version of yourself designed for an audience that was never paying as close attention as you thought. The people you've been performing for, they're running their own calculations, their own monitors, their own little approval checking machines. Half of them aren't watching you, they're watching themselves. They're performing for you while you perform for them. And somewhere in the middle of all that performance, two actual people never quite met. That's the tragedy, if you want to call it that. Not that you weren't loved, but that you were so busy being lovable that you were never quite present enough to feel it. And here is the question I want you to hold. Not answer whole. If the version of you that's been performing all this time disappeared tomorrow, if you woke up and simply could not do it anymore, could not run the calculation, could not monitor the room, what would be left? Are you afraid of that question? Because the answer is either more terrifying than you'd like, or more extraordinary. Either way, you're not ready for what I'm about to tell you. Part 3, the reframe. 8 o'clock, 18 o'clock, approximately 1,300 words. Point 1. Destroy the label. They called it neediness or insecurity or people pleasing. They gave it a small word and a smaller diagnosis and filed it under things to fix about yourself in year 3 of your self-improvement arc. They made it sound like a character defect, a factory error, something the more evolved version of you would have grown out of. Wrong. What you've been calling needness is actually hypervigilance with nowhere useful to point. It is a form of intelligence, a social intelligence, a relational intelligence that got aimed at the wrong target. You are not broken. You are a precision instrument that was calibrated against an unstable surface and has been vibrating slightly out of true ever since. The label people pleaser was invented by people who benefited from your people pleasing and wanted a way to make it sound like your problem. Think about that for exactly as long as it takes to become obvious. The world doesn't call it neediness when a soldier stays hypervigilant on a battlefield. The world calls That's survival. But when you carry that same vigilance into a boardroom or a relationship or a dinner party, suddenly it's a flaw. Interesting how the word changes based on whether your alertness is useful to someone in power or merely inconvenient to them. You were never needy. You were precise. You were reading a room that genuinely needed reading. The only mistake was believing the room would ever be stable enough to put the instrument down. A cage was never made of your weakness. It was made of your Akura Sai. Point 2. Reveal the real organ here is what approval-seeking actually is, stripped of the soft language. It is a loyalty contract with people who are no longer in the room, the people you first learned to perform for, the ones whose faces you scanned, whose moods you anticipated, whose comfort you prioritized over your own experience of existing. Most of them aren't even here anymore. Some are gone entirely. Some have forgotten the specific incidents you still replay, and yet their opinion, their imagined reaction, their theoretical verdict on who you are, that still runs the room, that still decides what you say, that still edits the draft. You are in many ways still a small creature making adjustments for a world that has long since moved on. Still filing a report to a headquarters that shut down decades ago. And the reason it persists is not weakness, it's conditioning. The brain learned very efficiently the way brains do that this behavior produced survival. And the brain does not update survival strategies just because the threat environment changed. It waits for you to tell it. It waits for you to demonstrate through action that the old rules no longer apply. You have been waiting for the feeling to change first. The brain has been waiting for the behavior to change first. Neither of you has moved. That is the stalemate. And the only way out is someone going first. Point 3, turn the lens on the judges now. The people who make you feel like you need their approval. The ones whose judgment you built architecture around. Let's look at them for a moment. Not with contempt. Contempt is just approval seeking wearing a disguise. But with honest curiosity. Because what someone judges you for always reveals more about their interior than yours. The person who judges your volume is someone who learned that quietness kept them safe. The P. Arson, who judges your ambition, is someone who killed theirs and resents the reminder that it was a choice. The person who judges your emotional honesty is someone who sealed that room off years ago and doesn't want you cracking the door. Their judgment is not information about you. It is autobiography. It is a window into what they are afraid of, what they had to give up, what they are still mourning. When someone tells you that you're too much, too direct, too feeling, too present, too weird, what they mean is, you're more than I allow myself to be. And that is uncomfortable. And I would prefer you reduce yourself to a level I can tolerate. And you, because you are very good at this, have been complying. I once spent time around a man who was enormously devoted to a city that, on its better evenings, tolerated him at best. He went to remarkable lengths. Really remarkable. To show up for people who would have preferred he didn't exist at all. And then return to whatever darkness he'd allocated for himself and call that a life well spent. I never quite worked out if that was heroism or the longest running exercise in unrequited approval I'd ever witnessed. Perhaps both. The distinction seemed to matter a great deal to him and very little to the city. People do not judge what they understand. They judge what they have suppressed. And the thing you keep apologizing for is almost certainly something they never gave themselves permission to be. Point 4. Name the concrete advantage. Here is what you don't hear about the other side. The actual other side, not the Instagram version, not the performative, unbothered pose, but what actually happens when someone genuinely stops. You get your signal back. All that bandwidth you've been spending, monitoring, adjusting, calculating, qualifying, it doesn't disappear. It doesn't leave you. It comes back online and starts pointing at something useful. Starts reading the room for actual information rather than threat assessment. Starts generating ideas rather than editing them. Starts producing real responses to real situations instead of carefully constructed replies designed to land without friction. The energy doesn't vanish. It redirects. And there is something else. Something that doesn't get said because it makes people uncomfortable. When you stop needing approval, you stop producing the anxious, slightly too eager energy that people can feel before you speak. And when that energy disappears, something strange happens. The approval, the actual genuine recognition from the people worth receiving it from starts arriving. Not because you chased it, because you stopped. And in the stillness, you became visible in a way that the performance never allowed. People can feel the difference between someone who wants something from them and someone who simply is. The first makes them slightly defensive. The second makes them curious. You have been performing to be seen. The irony is that the performance is exactly what was hiding you. Point 5. Distinguish use from ownership. There's a version of what I've been describing that goes wrong. And I want to name it clearly, because the wrong version is easy to mistake for the right one. The wrong version is not caring as a performance. It's the person who announces their indifference, who makes their not needing approval into the new thing they need approval for, who uses the language of freedom as a costume over the same old wound, just with different staging. I don't care what anyone thinks, delivered loudly to an audience with clear investment in whether the audience believes them. That's not freedom. That's the cage with the fresh coat of paint. The right version is quieter. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It looks lie. K. Someone who simply says what they think. Not aggressively. Not as a statement. Not aggressively. Not as a statement. But because it's what they think, and that seems like sufficient reason. Someone who can be disagreed with and not collapse. Who can be misunderstood and not immediately launch a correction campaign. Who can leave a room without replaying the conversation for the next 4 hours looking for damage. Not the knife being swung in panic. The knife held with intent. The hand that knows exactly what it's holding and has decided to hold it with some care. The difference is not attitude. It's not energy. It's certainty. A quiet, bone-deep certainty that what you are, unedited, unqualified, not performing for a single person in the room, is not only enough, but is in fact the only version of you worth anyone's time. Everything else is just theater. And the seats in the theater were never that comfortable anyway. Part 4, the solution. 18 o'clock, 26:00, here approximately 1,040 words. Shift 1. The language replicament. The first thing to change is not behavior. It's not habits, not routines, not morning practices or evening reflections. It's the words, internal words, the ones that run without you asking them to. Right now, your internal language around this goes something like, I shouldn't need this, or why do I care so much what they think? Or, in the darker moments, what's wrong with me? Those words are not descriptive. They're not accurate accounts of what's happening. They're verdicts issued by a judge who was appointed before you were old enough to have a say and has been presiding over your interior life ever since and has never once ruled in your favor. Replace them, not with affirmations. Affirmations are just verdicts in a cheerful font. Replace them with accurate statements, not, I shouldn't need this, but this is an old pattern running. It is doing what it learned to do. That doesn't mean I have to follow it. Not, why do I care so much? But my attention is currently on this person's opinion. I can redirect my attention, not what's wrong with me, but what is this trying to protect? And does it still need protecting? The language doesn't fix the pattern immediately. Nothing fixes it immediately. The language is the handle on the door. You can't walk through a door. You can't locate. And right now, the door is hidden behind a wall of self-judgment that is using up all the available light. Change the words first. The feelings follow words far more obediently than anyone admits. Shift 2. The environment added. There are rooms in your life that are specifically designed, not maliciously, not consciously, but structurally, to make you feel like the unqualified version of yourself. Rooms where the equilibrium requires your smallness, where the dynamic only functions if you keep performing the apologetic, accommodating, edges, sanded smooth version. Those rooms didn't set out to harm you. Those rooms didn't set out to harm you. They just found a configuration that worked. That kept the peace. That kept everyone in their designated position. And you, because you are good at reading rooms and adjusting, stepped into the configuration and stayed. The audit is not about burning those rooms down. It's about seeing them clearly, naming what they cost, recognizing that the exhaustion you feel after certain conversations, certain gatherings, certain people, that's not coincidence, that's information. That's your nervous system reporting back with the invoice. Make the list, not to act on immediately, just to know. These rooms require the performance. These people receive the real one. These situations are where the cage tightens automatically, and I spend the next 3 hours recovering. See it. Name it. Stop pretending the invoice doesn't arrive. Shift 3. The respons. Protoconc. The next time someone offers you a judgment, in a meeting, in a relationship, in the silence, after you said a true thing and watched someone decide they didn't like it, you need 2 sentences. Internal. Not spoken. Not defensive. Just the floor you stand on. The first sentence is, I notice this landed in a way that creates discomfort for them. The second sentence is, that is about the territory they're standing in, not the truth of what I said. That's it. Not a campaign, not a rebuttal, not a quiet spiral of second-guessing that runs until 3 a.m., just those 2 sentences, and then return to the thing you were doing before you were interrupted by someone else's interior weather. You are not responsible for managing the discomfort that your honesty creates in people who preferred the performance. You were never responsible for that. You just got recruited into the job without anyone asking. Shift 4. The ownership statement. There is a posture, not a gesture, not a stance. Something deeper than physical. That belongs to people who have made the quiet decision. It doesn't look like arrogance. Arrogance is just insecurity on the offensive. And it reads that way instantly to anyone paying attention. It doesn't look like indifference. Indifference is either numbness or performance, and neither is what I mean. It looks like this: a person who has simply stopped filing the report, not dramatically, not with announcement, just the filing cabinet is closed now. The forms are no longer being processed. The internal bureaucracy that spent years documenting every social interaction and submitting it for external review has simply stopped. Not in protest, not as a statement, just because one day they decided that the only review that mattered was their own, and their own standard turned out to be something they could actually meet. The ownership statement is not a thing you say. It is a thing you become, slowly, through 100 small moments of choosing not to edit, not to monitor, not to perform. Through the accumulation of evidence, personal, private, unremarkable evidence, that who you are when no one is watching is actually someone worth being when everyone is. You don't announce it. You don't post it. You don't wait for someone to notice and validate the change. You just close the filing cabinet and get on with it. Part 5. The close. The close. The close. 00. Approximately 520 words. Here is what is actually true. The system, not the specific people, not your family, not your school, not any individual. The system was not built for someone who sees clearly. It was built for people who need the loop running. Approval, validation, the hunger for recognition. These are not personal flaws. They are features. Features of a machine that runs on human attention, that monetizes InSeQ. Ready. That profits enormously from a population of people too busy managing their social standing to notice what is being decided above their heads while they're distracted. An approved of person is a legible person, is a legible person. A person whose behavior can be anticipated and leveraged, whose fear of social exile makes them reliable, whose need for the nod makes them manageable. A person who has stopped needing the nod. That is a different problem entirely. They can't be threatened with exclusion. They've already excluded themselves from the social contract that made exclusion a threat. They can't be motivated by reputation. They've stopped investing in a reputation built on someone else's preferences. They can't be controlled by the fear of being seen because they've already made peace with exactly what they are. And they'd rather be known truly by 3 people than vaguely beloved by 300. That is not a tragedy. That is the only freedom that doesn't have a trap door. And here's the truest thing I can say about where you are right now. You already know this, not as information. You knew it as information, as a feeling, as that specific recurring sensation of exhaustion you get after a performance you didn't ask to give. That bone weariness after a conversation where you edited in real time and left feeling like you'd spent the whole encounter visiting yourself from a distance. You know the feeling of your own absence from your own life. You've known it for a while. Did your balls drop off? You just kept hoping the exhaustion would pass,